The alarms wouldn't stop ringing. Red lights flashed through the research facility's corridors as Mark rushed to save what he could from the laboratory. His hands trembled as he packed the last samples of their hybrid plants into the preservation unit. Outside, the storms were getting worse. They always did these days. The protective dome above the facility groaned under the assault of acid rain and hurricane-force winds. "You must leave now." Blue's voice came from behind him, the plant-based being's bioluminescent patches pulsing with worried patterns. Unlike humans, Blue didn't need to shout to be heard over the alarms. Their voice resonated directly in Mark's mind, a gift of verdant biology. "Just one more sample," Mark insisted, carefully securing a particularly promising hybrid they'd created together. This plant could survive in both Earth's dying atmosphere and the crystal-based ecosystems of Blue's homeworld. It represented everything they'd worked for, proof that their species could build something beautiful together. The facility shook. Somewhere in the distance, glass shattered. The evacuation orders had come 3 hours ago, but Mark had refused to leave without securing their research. Blue had stayed, of course. They always stayed together. "The last ship departs in 20 minutes, Blue reminded him, their crystalline appendages gently taking the preservation unit from Mark's hands. "You cannot miss it. The atmospheric degradation has reached critical levels." Mark knew Blue was right. The last colony ship, Hope's Dawn, was humanity's final chance. Earth had passed the point of no return faster than anyone had predicted. The wealthy had already fled on earlier ships, establishing colonies on distant worlds. Hope's Dawn was different. Built by an international coalition for ordinary citizens, scientists, and essential personnel. "Come with me," Mark said, not for the first time. "There's room." I checked the manifests. The botanical section has space for additional research staff. Blue's colors shifted to a deep blue, their equivalent of a sad smile. "You know I cannot. My biology is incompatible with your cryosystems. Besides, my people need me here. We will continue studying Earth's ecosystems, learning from humanity's mistakes to prevent such disasters on other worlds." Another violent shake. The lights flickered. Through the facility's windows, Mark could see the storm barriers failing in the distance. Soon, the full force of Earth's poisoned atmosphere would reach them. "Take it," Blue said, handing back the preservation unit. "Our research must survive. Perhaps someday on your new world." The facility's AI interrupted with its final warning. 15 minutes until Hope's Dawn departure. All remaining personnel must evacuate immediately. Facility shutdown commencing. Mark clutched the preservation unit to his chest. Years of friendship, discovery, and shared dreams were stored inside its climate-controlled interior. He and Blue had revolutionized the understanding of plant consciousness together. They'd proven that humanity and the Verdant Collective could achieve incredible things through cooperation. Now, like Earth itself, it was all ending. "I'll find you again," Mark promised, his voice thick with emotion. "Wherever they take us, I'll find a way to signal you. The energy signature we developed, I'll build it into something bigger, a beacon." Blue stretched one crystalline appendage toward Mark's face, catching a tear. The liquid caused their surface to shimmer with rainbow patterns. "Fascinating. Even now, you show me new aspects of human biology." Their colors shifted rapidly. Joy, sadness, hope, and fear all mixing together. "Go, my friend. Live. Grow. We will meet again." The final warning blared. Mark took one last look at the being who had become his closest friend, memorizing the pattern of their bioluminescence. Then he ran. Through corridors they'd walked together countless times, past laboratories where they'd made breakthrough after breakthrough. Mark sprinted toward the evacuation pods. His lungs burned from exertion, the preservation unit heavy in his arms. Behind him, he could hear the facility beginning its shutdown sequence, airtight doors sealing one by one. The last pod was waiting. As it carried him toward Hope's Dawn, Mark watched the research facility disappear into the storm. Somewhere inside, He knew Blue was watching too. The pod's small window showed him humanity's dying world one final time. A swirling mass of toxic storms and ruined cities. Hope's dawn hung in orbit above, its massive shape representing both humanity's greatest failure and its last hope. As the pod docked, Mark clutched the preservation unit tighter. Inside were the seeds of reunion. He just had to find the right place to plant them. 20 years felt like both a lifetime and a blink of an eye. Mark stood in his greenhouse on Haven, checking the readings on the hybrid plants that had become his life's work. The preservation unit from Earth, now properly expanded and integrated into a full cultivation system, hummed softly in the corner. Its contents had grown into something remarkable, a living bridge between two worlds. The colony had done well for itself. Outside the greenhouse's curved walls, Haven's twin suns painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. The settlement stretched across the valley, a collection of domed buildings and carefully planned green spaces. They'd learned from Earth's mistakes here. Everything was sustainable. Everything was in balance. Mark touched one of the hybrid plants, its leaves shimmering with a faint bioluminescence that reminded him of Blue. The plant responded to his touch, just as their original experiments had shown. Plant consciousness, once considered impossible by Earth's scientists, was now an accepted fact among Haven's population, all thanks to the research he and Blue had started so long ago. "Environmental report ready for review, sir," said Tom, one of his younger assistants, entering the greenhouse with a datapad. The boy paused, noticing the familiar distant look in Mark's eyes. "Thinking about Earth again?" "Not Earth," Mark replied, carefully pruning the hybrid plant. "Just an old friend." He told the story many times over the years, the plant-based alien who had revolutionized their understanding of biology. Some of the younger colonists thought it was just a tale, something to make the history of Earth's fall less painful. But the living proof surrounded them. The hybrid plants were everywhere now, cleaning Haven's air more efficiently than any Earth species could. Their crystalline structures, merged with organic matter, created oxygen at twice the rate of normal plants while consuming more carbon dioxide. They were Blue's legacy, even if most people didn't realize it. "The energy beacon is still active," Tom said carefully, knowing it was a sensitive subject. 20 years of power, running that signal into space. The Council keeps asking if we should redirect the resources. Mark shook his head, checking another plant's growth patterns. "The beacon stays on. It's not just a signal, it's a promise." He didn't mention the dreams he still had, where Blue's bioluminescent patterns danced through the darkness of space, searching. Some things were too personal to share. The greenhouse door opened again. This time it was Lisa, the colony's head of security. Her expression was serious. "Mark, we need you in the control room." The long-range sensors picked up something unusual. His heart skipped a beat, but he kept his voice steady. "What kind of unusual?" "An energy signature we've never seen before." "Well, that's not exactly true." Lisa glanced at the hybrid plants. "It matches the power readings from your beacon, but it's coming from somewhere out there." Mark's hands trembled as he set down his tools. For 20 years, he'd maintained the beacon, using the same energy pattern he and Blue had discovered in their research. It was unique, a combination of human technology and verdant biological principles. No one else could have replicated it. "Show me," he said, following Lisa out of the greenhouse. Tom trailed behind them, curious but silent. The control room was busy when they arrived. Technicians moved between screens, tracking something in Haven's outer orbit. Mark pushed through to the main display, his eyes scanning the readings. There it was, a signature he'd know anywhere. The same harmonic frequency he'd discovered by accident when studying plant consciousness. The same pattern that had made Blue's crystals resonate in perfect harmony with Earth's organic matter. "It's moving in a search pattern," one of the technicians reported. "Whatever it is, it's looking for something." Mark pressed his hand against the screen, tracing the familiar energy waves. After 20 years, the signal was slightly different. Evolved, just as their hybrid plants had evolved. But its core was unchanged, like a voice calling out in the darkness, saying, "I remember our promise." "They found us," Mark whispered, his vision blurring with tears. "They actually found us." Around him, the control room erupted into activity as the signal grew stronger. Haven's automated defense systems began powering up, treating the unknown contact as a potential threat. But Mark knew better. After all these years apart, their research had finally grown into something greater than either of them could have imagined. The seeds of reunion had taken root among the stars, and soon they would bloom. The crystal ship glided through the darkness of space, its living walls pulsing with patterns of light that mirrored its pilot's thoughts. Blue stood at the heart of the vessel, their crystalline form now twice its original size, growth earned through years of dedicated research and emotional development. The ship itself was their greatest achievement, a perfect blend of verdant biology and human engineering principles. Around them, screens showed thousands of star systems they had already searched, each one marked, studied, and regretfully abandoned when no trace of human settlement was found. The Verdant Collective had called them obsessed. Perhaps they were right. But how could Blue explain that somewhere out there, a piece of their consciousness was missing? Analysis of Sector 947 complete, the ship's living computer announced, its voice a gentle harmony of crystalline tones. No matches for the target energy signature. Blue's colors shifted to deep purple, frustration mixed with determination. They had spent years studying the human emotional spectrum, even modifying their own crystalline structure to better understand and express these feelings. Mark would have been fascinated by the changes this had caused in their biology. "Expand search parameters," Blue commanded. "Factor in potential variations due to technological advancement." Their own energy signature had evolved over the years. It made sense that Mark's would have too. The ship responded, its walls flickering with calculations. Behind Blue, 3 other verdant beings monitored different systems. They were the youngest and brightest of their species, chosen by the collective to aid in this search. At first, they hadn't understood Blue's dedication to finding one human among the countless stars. But over time, as Blue shared memories of their work with Mark, the young ones had begun to understand. "Elder," one of them spoke up, their crystals chiming softly. "I've been studying the human emotional patterns you taught us. Their concept of missing someone. I think I finally understand it. It's like a vital nutrient your structure needs but cannot produce on its own." Blue's surface rippled with approval. The young ones were learning. Humans had taught the Verdant Collective more than just science. They had shown them that emotion wasn't a weakness, but a different kind of strength. A soft alarm chimed through the ship. One of the search arrays had detected something unusual. Blue moved quickly to the main console, their crystalline appendages dancing over the controls. "Energy signature detected," the ship reported. "Partial match to target pattern. Source appears to be a maintained beacon." Blue's entire form lit up with intense bioluminescence. Their natural glow, usually soft and controlled, burst into brilliant patterns of blue and gold, hope and excitement in the verdant emotional spectrum. The ship's walls reflected their state, turning the command center into a light show that would have amazed any human observer. "Location?" Blue asked, their voice resonating with barely controlled emotion. The ship displayed a star map, highlighting a system near the edge of their search grid. The beacon signal was clear now, a perfect harmony of human technology and verdant principles. Just like the hybrid plants they had created together, it sang with both voices at once. "Calculating travel time," one of the young ones announced. "With current fuel reserves, we can reach the source in approximately 3 standard days." Blue's colors shifted through a rainbow of emotions. After 20 years of searching, after visiting hundreds of colony worlds, and following countless false leads, they had finally found a real trace. The signal was unmistakable. It bore Mark's signature touch, the same brilliant insight that had made their original research so groundbreaking. "Send word to the collective," Blue instructed. "Tell them we found it. Tell them." They paused, searching for the right words, the right way to express the storm of emotions flowing through their crystalline form. "Tell them we're going home." The young ones exchanged glances, their own colors showing mixtures of excitement and curiosity. They had never seen their elder so affected, so brilliantly illuminated with purpose. The ship adjusted its course, its living walls humming with renewed energy. As they accelerated toward the signal source, Blue began reviewing all their research on human reunion customs. They had studied them extensively, wanting to be prepared for this moment. Their crystalline structure had even developed new capabilities, inspired by human emotional expressions. Soon, very soon, they would see if 20 years of growth and change had prepared them for the moment they had dreamed of. The stars streaked past outside, each one bringing them closer to the friend who had taught them that some bonds were stronger than time and distance, that some connections could survive even the death of a world. The control room of Haven Colony hadn't slept in 3 days. Ever since the strange signal appeared, teams of technicians had worked around the clock, studying its patterns and trying to determine if it posed a threat. Mark hadn't left his post at the main scanner, his eyes fixed on the flowing data streams that reminded him so much of Blue's bioluminescent patterns. "The signal's getting stronger," Lisa said, bringing him another cup of coffee. As head of security, she should have been worried. Instead, she found herself fascinated by Mark's reaction to the whole situation. In 20 years, she'd never seen him so alive. "Whatever it is, it's definitely heading straight for us." Mark nodded, his fingers tracing the energy patterns on the screen. The signal had evolved, becoming more complex than the original beacon he'd designed. But at its core, it still carried the unique harmony he and Blue had discovered, the perfect resonance between human technology and verdant biology. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a particularly intricate pattern. "The way it pulses. It's like watching someone breathe. The ship isn't just using the energy signature, it's alive." His voice carried a hint of wonder that made him sound younger, more like the scientist he'd been on Earth. The colony's governor walked in, followed by several council members. Their faces showed a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Mark," the governor said, "we need to make a decision. This signal matches nothing in our database except your beacon. If it's really the aliens you told us about." "The Verdant Collective," Mark corrected gently. "And yes, I'm certain it's them. No one else could replicate this pattern." He pulled up the original data from his research, preserved for 2 decades in the colony's computers. "See, the core frequency is identical. They found us." One of the council members stepped forward, an older woman who remembered Earth. "We left our world because we had no choice. Now we have one. These aliens, even if they're the ones you knew, they're still an unknown factor. We have families to protect." Mark turned to face them, his expression serious. "When humanity was at its lowest point, when Earth was dying around us, the Verdant Collective shared their knowledge freely. They taught us things about biology we never imagined. The plants that clean our air, that help us grow food in Haven soil. They exist because of what I learned from them." The room fell silent except for the steady beep of the sensors. On the main screen, the approaching ship's signal pulsed like a heartbeat, growing stronger with each passing hour. "Show them," Mark said suddenly. "Show them what their ship is doing." He typed quickly, bringing up a detailed analysis of the signal pattern. "Look at the complexity, the way it adapts and changes. They're not just broadcasting. They're trying to communicate." The technicians gathered around, watching as Mark decoded the patterns. Within the signal's harmonics, layers of meaning emerge: pride in scientific achievement, hope for reunion, curiosity about what they would find. The emotions were encoded in the very frequency of the transmission, written in a language that blended mathematics and biology. "Fascinating," whispered one of the council members, a former physicist. "It's like they've turned emotions into energy waves." Mark smiled, remembering how Blue's colors would shift with their feelings. "That's exactly what they've done. They've spent 20 years learning to speak to us in a way we can understand." He turned to the governor, his eyes bright with unused tears. They're not just coming to make contact. They're coming home. A new alert sounded. The ship had entered the outer edges of their solar system. On the screens, its image finally became clear. A massive crystalline structure that seemed to grow rather than being built, its surface rippling with patterns of light that mirrored the signal they've been studying. 3 days, Lisa announced, checking the calculations. They'll reach Haven in 3 days. The governor looked around the room, seeing the mixture of fear and wonder on people's faces. Then she looked at Mark, who hadn't stopped smiling since the ship appeared. "Tell us everything," she said finally. "Everything about these beings, about your friend. If we're going to welcome them, we need to understand." Mark nodded, his hand still moving over the console, watching the beautiful dance of light and energy that was bringing his oldest friend back to him. After 20 years, the seeds of trust they'd planted on a dying Earth were finally ready to bloom among the stars. The colony's main meeting hall had never been so full. Hundreds of people packed the rows of seats, their voices a mix of excitement and fear. On the giant screen behind the speaking platform, the crystal ship glowed against the darkness of space, now close enough to see clearly. Its surface rippled with waves of blue and green light, like an ocean made of stars. Mark stood at the platform, facing his neighbors and friends of 20 years. He'd spent the last 2 days explaining everything. About Blue, about their research, about the Verdant Collective. Now it was time to convince them to open their hearts as well as their minds. "I understand your fear," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "We left Earth because we had no choice. We came here to build something new, something safe." He gestured to the plants that decorated the hall, hybrid species that carried Blue's legacy in every leaf. "But look around you. Everything that helps us survive here came from working together with the Verdant Collective. They're not our enemies. They never were." A man stood up in the crowd. "But how can we be sure? 20 years is a long time. Things change. People change." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Mark nodded, touching the old preservation unit he brought with him. Its display still showed readings from their last experiment together. "You're right. Things do change. When I last saw Blue, they couldn't understand human laughter. Now look at their ship. It's built using the same principles we discovered together, but it's evolved into something more beautiful than we ever imagined." The screen showed new images, close-up views of the ship's surface. The patterns weren't random. They formed complex mathematical sequences that any scientist could recognize. "They're not hiding who they are," Mark explained. "They're showing us everything. Their technology, their intentions, even their emotions. They've spent 20 years learning to speak our language." Lisa stood up from her seat in the front row. As head of security, her opinion carried weight. "I've studied the ship's approach pattern," she said. "They've deliberately kept their distance. They've responded to every communication test we've sent. Whatever their intentions, they're being careful not to frighten us." The governor called for order as debate broke out across the hall. "We need to make a decision," she announced. "The ship will reach orbit in less than 24 hours. We have 3 options. Deny them permission to land, allow a restricted landing at our outer facility, or welcome them fully into the colony." Mark touched one of the hybrid plants beside the platform. It responded to him instantly, its leaves turning to follow his hand. "When Blue and I first created these plants, nobody believed it was possible. Combining Earth biology with verdant crystal structures. They said it would never work." He smiled at the memory. "But we didn't just make it work. We created something new, something that made both our species better." The plant's leaves shimmered with a faint bioluminescence, a trait inherited from its verdant parent species. Several people in the audience gasped. Even after years of living with these hybrids, their beauty could still surprise. "I'm not asking you to trust them blindly," Mark continued. "I'm asking you to trust in what we can achieve together. 20 years ago, they helped us when our world was dying. Now they've crossed the galaxy to find us. Not to invade, not to take anything from us, but because they believe in the same thing we do, that we're better together than apart. The governor stepped forward. We'll put it to a vote. But first, I have a question for you, Mark. In all these years, why did you never give up? Why keep the beacon running? Keep hoping they'd find us. Mark looked up at the screen, at the beautiful ship that carried his oldest friend. Because Blue taught me something important about their species. When a verdant makes a promise, they change their very biology to keep it. They grow into what they need to be. He touched the preservation unit again, remembering that last goodbye. We promised we find each other again. I knew they would never stop looking. The hall fell silent. On the screen, the crystal ship pulsed with patterns that seemed almost like words. Welcome, home, friend. After 20 years, the language barrier between their species had finally started to fall. The governor raised her hand, all in favor of allowing them to land. One by one, hands rose across the hall. Fear gave way to hope, to curiosity, to the same spirit of discovery that had helped humanity reach the stars. Tomorrow, they would make history, not through war or conquest, but through a reunion 20 years in the making. The morning of the landing brought the first rain Haven had seen in months. People gathered at the designated landing zone, 5 miles from the main colony, their faces turned up to the strange crystalline ship now visible in the dawn sky. Mark stood at the front of the crowd, his old preservation unit clutched in his hands like a lifeline. Lisa and her security team formed a loose circle around the landing pad, their weapons lowered but ready. 2 minutes to atmospheric entry, announced the colony's AI through the public speakers. Above them, the ship began to glow as it hit the upper atmosphere. But unlike the brutal fire of human ships, this one seemed to dance with the air itself, its crystalline surface adapting and flowing like liquid light. "Look at that," whispered Tom, who had insisted on standing with his mentor. "It's like it's swooning through the sky." The young botanist had grown up hearing stories about the Verdant Collective, but seeing their technology in action left him speechless. The ship descended in a spiral of light, each rotation slower and more graceful than the last. As it neared the ground, its surface rippled with patterns that matched the hybrid plants in Mark's greenhouse. The ship wasn't just landing. It was communicating with every piece of verdant biology on Haven. 100 meters, called out Lisa, her voice steady despite the tension. The security teams shifted nervously. Most of them had never seen anything bigger than a supply shuttle land on Haven. The crystal ship settled onto the landing pad without a sound, its surface still flowing with waves of color. It was smaller up close than it had appeared in orbit, about the size of 3 houses put together. Its shape kept changing slightly, as if it couldn't quite decide what form would make the humans most comfortable. Atmospheric analysis complete, the ship announced in perfect, if slightly musical, English. Environment compatible with both species. Beginning decontamination sequence. Mark stepped forward, but Lisa held up a hand. "Wait," she said softly. "Let them follow the protocols we discussed." He nodded, understanding the need for caution even as his heart raced with anticipation. The ship's surface suddenly blazed with light, forcing everyone to shield their eyes. When the glare faded, a doorway had formed in its side. Not a mechanical door, but an opening that had grown like a flower blooming. Inside, something moved. The security teams raised their weapons slightly, then lowered them again in confusion. The being that emerged was nothing like the grainy images from Earth's archives. Blue had changed in ways that defied expectation. They stood twice as tall as before, their crystalline body now a complex lattice of translucent structures that caught and reflected the morning light. But it was their surface that drew everyone's attention. Waves of color flowed across it in patterns that seemed almost human. Joy, anxiety, hope, and something like tears, all expressed in light and color. "Mark." Blue's voice carried across the landing pad, not just in their minds as before, but in actual sound. They had learned to vibrate their crystalline structure to produce human speech. "Friend." Mark took a step forward, then another. 20 years of change stood between them. Blue had grown taller, more complex, more beautiful. Mark's hair had gone gray at the temples, and lines creased the corners of his eyes. But when their gazes met, time seemed to fold in on itself. "You learned to speak out loud," Mark said, his voice thick with emotion. The preservation unit in his hands hummed, responding to Blue's presence. "I learned many things." Blue's colors shifted to a pattern Mark had never seen before, something between a laugh and a cry. Growing is what friends do. The security teams slowly lowered their weapons completely. It was impossible to feel threatened by the pure joy radiating from both beings. Behind Blue, 3 younger Verdant emerged from the ship, their own colors muted in respect for the moment. "The hybrid plants," Blue said, gesturing to the nearby fields where their joint creation grew. "They flourished." Mark smiled through his tears. "Of course they did. They were built on a promise." He held up the preservation unit. "I kept our last experiment. I knew you'd want to see how it turned out." Blue moved closer, their crystalline form catching the morning light and transforming it into a rainbow that danced across the crowd. 2 decades of separation dissolved in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Then Blue did something that made every human present catch their breath in wonder. Something that would be written about in Haven's history books for generations to come. Something that proved just how far they had gone to understand their human friends. The morning sun cast long shadows across the landing pad as Blue stood before the gathered crowd. Their crystalline form towered above the humans, glowing with colors that shifted like aurora in the dawn light. For a moment, everyone held their breath, waiting to see what this alien being would do next. Then it happened. A sound unlike anything the colonists had ever heard emerged from Blue's crystalline structure. A laugh. Not a mechanical reproduction or a synthetic copy, but a genuine, joyful human laugh that seemed to bubble up from deep within their crystalline core. The sound carried across the landing pad, warm and real, and absolutely impossible for a crystal-based life form. But Blue wasn't finished surprising them. As the laugh faded, points of light began to form on their surface. They grew brighter, gathering into droplets that caught the sunlight like diamonds. Tears. The verdant being was crying, each tear made of pure crystalline light that fell to the ground and shattered into tiny rainbows. The security teams forgot their weapons entirely. The colonists forgot their fear. They watched in amazement as this alien being expressed emotions in a way that was both completely foreign and deeply familiar. Blue had spent 20 years not just learning about human emotions, but physically changing their own biology to express them. "How?" Mark whispered, reaching out to catch one of the crystal tears. It felt warm against his skin, humming with the same frequency as their old experiments. "How did you do this?" "We studied everything," Blue said, their voice carrying both sound and mental resonance now. "Every record of human expression, every way you show feelings. Our scientists said it was impossible for crystal beings to laugh or cry. Their colors shifted to a pattern that was somehow, impossibly, a smile. But they also said combining Earth and Vertan biology was impossible. We proved them wrong before. I wanted to prove them wrong again." The younger Verdant behind Blue watched with obvious fascination. They had never seen these new abilities demonstrated so fully. One of them spoke up, their own colors showing patterns of wonder. "Elder Blue changed everything about how we understand emotions. They showed us that feelings aren't just thoughts. They're physical changes, real things that reshape us." Mark looked down at the preservation unit in his hands, then back at his friend who had literally transformed themselves to bridge the gap between their species. With trembling fingers, he opened the unit and removed a small crystal organic hybrid, the last experiment they had worked on together. "It kept growing," he said, holding it up. "Even in preservation, it kept trying to reach the light. Just like you kept searching, all these years." Blue's surface rippled with new colors, joy and sadness and hope all mixed together. They reached out with one crystalline appendage, gently touching the hybrid plant. The moment they made contact, both the plant and Blue's surface lit up with synchronized patterns of light. 2 decades apart hadn't broken their connection. It had only made it stronger. We all kept growing, Blue said, their laugh tears creating a small constellation of light around them. The plants, the ship, our understanding. Growth is what living things do. They turned to address the gathered colonists, their voice carrying across the landing pad. We come to share what we have learned, and to learn what you can teach us. The universe is large, but friendship makes it smaller. The governor stepped forward, her own eyes wet with tears. "Welcome to Haven," she said simply. Then, looking at the rainbow scatter of crystal tears on the ground, she added, "Though it seems you've already made yourself at home." More verdant emerged from the ship, each one showing their own unique patterns of light and color. But none of them could do what Blue had done. None of them had spent 20 years reshaping their very being to express love in a way their friend could understand. Mark finally closed the distance between them, reaching up to touch Blue's crystalline surface, just as he had done 2 decades ago in their old laboratory. The connection was instant. Memories, emotions, and 20 years of growth flowing between them like light through a prism. "You changed so much," Mark said softly. Blue's surface shimmered with another impossible smile. "Some things never change," they replied, their crystal tears falling like stars. "Friends help each other grow." That is as true now as it was on Earth. Around them, humans and verdant began to mingle, their shadows merging in the morning light. Above them, Haven's twin suns painted the crystal ship in colors no one had names for yet. But they would learn. Together, they would find words for everything new and wonderful that was about to begin.